I don't necessarily view myself as a leader in Maryland, but I am associated with some organizations in which I have at least some leadership posts. So, for instance, I'm on the board of First Mariner Bank. And my hope there is to help keep alive a bank headquartered in Baltimore, headquartered in Maryland, locally owned, and locally oriented and focused. That's my goal. That's why I joined that board, to do that. I'm on the Baltimore City Public School System board. And again, that's a challenging environment, of course, but the goal has been, as one of 9 board members, to bring a better quality of leadership. And the best thing that we've done in the last few years, I've been on the board 4 years, is to bring a great CEO to town, Andres Alonso. We got him from New York. Many people across the country were surprised that he accepted the Baltimore job. We are one of the largest school districts in the country, but many people know us to be a very challenging school district and one that has a tendency to destroy reputations. But nonetheless, Andres Alonso came. He's doing a fabulous job. Test scores are rising. And by the way, our test scores are no longer the lowest in the state. On the recent MSAs, we outscored both Prince George's County and Dorchester County. We're number 22 now, not 24. That means we have a long way to go, but that's what it means, I think, to be a leader, to try to get an organization moving in the right direction. And as I say, I'm just one of 9 board members, but the fact of the matter is, as a board, we picked a great leader and we're moving ahead. One of the other things I've tried to do is be, to a certain extent at least, an opinion leader, because, for instance, the voice of business in Maryland is extremely weak. And the business voice is almost not heard at all in Annapolis. And you can see this in terms of the tax policies that are made, the regulatory policies that are made. And actually, I think that the voice of business has been getting weaker in Maryland over time, even though the success of businesses has become that much more important when the state's unemployment rate is now above 7%. The African American unemployment rate nationally is around 15%. And if you include discouraged workers and the underemployed, it's probably closer to 25%. And who is going to help these people find work disproportionately going forward? It's not going to be government, because government doesn't have the resources anymore to create a lot of jobs directly, either at the federal level, state level, local level. So it has to be about private sector businesses, and yet I think everyone appreciates the need for private businesses to thrive in Maryland and to create jobs and to be profitable and to be productive and globally competitive, and yet the business voice is almost unheard in this state. If you look at recent debates, for instance, on taxes, the one tax that Maryland businesses have supported, generally speaking, is a raise in the gasoline tax to help put more money into the Transportation Trust Fund and to put more money into Maryland's infrastructure. That's good for business. That's the one tax we haven't seen an increase in. Retail sales tax, income taxes, so on and so on, have gone up, but not that tax. And that's, again, a reflection of the fact that businesses have very little voice in this state. Oh, I think we're not paying attention during any part of the process, even during the part of the process where we're electing someone. There's a power of incumbency in this country that's really quite astonishing. It's quite rare for incumbents to lose. And I think that's what made, in part, the gubernatorial election in New Jersey so special in some sense. Special not from the perspective that I liked the outcome or didn't like the outcome, but special that the incumbent lost. It's quite rare for incumbents to lose, and that's really a function of the fact that we're not paying attention, that we're not holding people accountable, and therefore when we see the names on the ballots, we tend to vote for the name that we recognize, whether or not that person has performed well in their function as an elected representative, and as a result, the incumbent gets reelected, and challengers often are not elected. And that's bad, because when you don't hold people accountable, you're not going to get good results. You get the government you deserve. We have the government we deserve. If we want better government, we have to pay more attention, and we have to explain to people what we want. That said, we're also a pretty immature people, I think, as Americans. The whole healthcare debate, I think, really shows how immature we've become as a nation. These town halls where people are screaming and screaming elected officials, so that talk about things like death panels. No one has proposed a death panel. No one would. Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't put it forth publicly. No such thing. And yet the debate became about death panels. Do we want death panels? Ridiculous. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why we spend so much money on healthcare in this country, and we generally, generate fewer results. As an example, in England, they spend a smaller proportion of their economy, their gross domestic product, on healthcare, but they insure everybody. In America, we are unable to insure 46 million people, and we still spend more than them. This is a bizarre result, and yet we accept this. And you have many people out there fighting for the status quo when it's pretty clear the status quo is broken. hard because there's something we call rational ignorance. And many voters, or potential voters I should say, because many Americans don't even vote, of course, but many potential voters, there's a rationality behind remaining ignorant, which is it takes work to be educated on issues, political issues. It takes time to be educated about their elected leaders. And it takes time to educate oneself about the performance of top or leading bureaucrats. And yet, the chance that one's vote would actually make a difference in the course of a particular election is almost zero. And so people stay rationally ignorant. The people who want to really play politics are hyper-educated. They want to get the policymakers to do X or Y or Z, to subsidize their development, or to pass this zoning modification, or to do whatever it happens to be. And so they selfishly engage themselves in the political process, not with the aim of improving society at large, but in terms of maximizing benefits to them from the political process. So the median person, the person who's not motivated that way, needs to be more educated. Why? Because they're a citizen, because they should take responsibility for the direction of their city, their state, their country. And so even though it makes sense to spend less time at some level becoming educated, that's what we need the median or the average person to do, to be less selfish, to be more engaged, to be more socially oriented, and to bridge the divides between us. America has become very cliquish, and this is a problem. And this also shows up in our politics. This is why it's hard for us to compromise anymore, because we've become so cliquish. We don't view each other as one nation anymore, just a set of, turfs. And this is a major problem, and I think that's what the average and median person have to become: more responsible, less selfish. Yeah, we certainly lack leadership, and we lack managerial skills as well. These are two major shortcomings in American society and in the US economy. It's not to say that we do not have some profoundly gifted leaders, and I actually judge Barack Obama to be profoundly gifted as a leader, but that's not enough. One man, one person, one good leader is not enough for our nation of about 307 million people. And you need leaders throughout society, whether in the not-for-profit community, in individual businesses, in government agencies, so on and so forth. And that's, I think, where America has fallen short. The business sector is a perfect example, by the way. I think the quality of management in this country is lousy, particularly at large US corporations. And many of these business leaders, they talk about free enterprise, or talk about free enterprise, and let the private sector do the heavy lifting, get government out of the way. And as soon as the top of the food chain in corporate America got into trouble, whether the automakers or the investment banks in New York got into trouble, the first thing they did was ran to government. So they've been fighting for years, cut our taxes, stop regulating us, and as soon as they got into trouble, they ran to the government, to which they did not want to pay any taxes. And it's problematic. And it's a reflection of the fact that very little accountability. They paid themselves enormous bonuses. They continue to pay themselves enormous bonuses, but not for performance. And that's one of the reasons I think that many Americans have become angry at the private sector, angry at business in general, and therefore support measures that are really anti-business, whether it's more regulation, higher taxes, whatever it happens to be, which sort of also generates some negative outcomes as well, including less job growth. And so I blame much of this on the private sector itself. The private sector brought this upon themselves by being utterly irresponsible and, again, very selfish. It used to be the case, that businesses really were much more attuned to the needs of their society, to the needs of their community, not just through charitable giving. These days when businesses give to charity, many of them make a big deal about that. Look, we've given to this orchestra, we've given to this school, so on and so forth. It used to be the case that businesses would give to their community because they understood the health of their community was an integral part of the health of their business. They did it for that reason. We need to get back to that. That's the next one to leadership. Well, first and foremost, and this would be an answer for many people, my father. And he great man, physician, came to America in 1967, built up a successful private medical practice in Illinois, raised us, sent us to great schools, and sacrificed immensely for his children. And that's what I'm trying to do for my own children. So that's, following an example. My father, a leader, I'm following his example. Another person, my mentor in my career, a guy named Dr. Michael A. Conti, brilliant economist, and he taught me how you can tell stories with data. And often people in America are actually scared of numbers. In fact, many of our students will tell you, it's not that they don't like math, they're scared of math. They're scared of numbers. And it's one of the reasons, of course, we don't produce in this country enough computer programmers, enough engineers, enough mathematicians, enough physicists, so on and so forth, because you need math at the core. But in any case, he taught me how you weave tales together with data. Tell the story, bring data alive for people, to help them understand what's happening in their community, what's happening to them personally with respect to their finances or whatever it happens to be. I think that was very important, and that's one of the reasons that, to the extent that I have voice, I have voice, is because I try to weave data into everything I say. And that makes everything more credible. I mean, it's nice to argue things with soaring rhetoric, but I think what many people are influenced by is the one big number, the number that tells them, this is the truth. And the implication of this is that we must head in this direction. And I think that's really what's been responsible. Also, Dr. Conti, when I was very young, still in my 20s, gave me all kinds of opportunities to make a fool of myself with respect to public speaking. He put me in front of a lot of audiences, took a lot of risk putting me in front of his greatest stakeholders, his clientele. And I learned from that process, mistakes I made, missteps, and so on and so forth. And so today I'm quite comfortable doing a lot of public speaking, including interviews like this. And that helps too, because a lot of people are very scared to stand up and say what they think. But because over time I've done it so much, I don't give it a second thought. Well, everyone's going to be wrong once in a while. And with respect to math or statistics, they say there are lies, damn lies of statistics.
Right.
And so even statistics can be quite misleading, and anyone can use statistics to support their argument or the other argument, so on and so forth. And that's in fact what I spend much of my day doing, using statistics to support my clients' arguments. And there might be another economist or analyst out there who's doing the same thing for the people who oppose them. And so this is what we do. So the statistics don't necessarily reveal the truth very clearly, but at least from my perspective, that's where one begins. You begin with the data and look what the data say, and then you move on to the next steps in terms of putting together rhetorical arguments. But yeah, I think many people, you've seen this before, right? You see this in schools. Many students are afraid to raise their hands. Why? Because they don't want to be wrong, they don't want to be embarrassed, they don't want to be humiliated. Many people do this also in public settings, whether it's, for instance, at public hearings on a zoning matter or whatever it happens to be. They don't want to stand up because they're afraid of being wrong, or they're afraid of being booed or being disliked for espousing their opinion. But democracy requires that everyone feel comfortable expressing their views. And at the end of the day, once all those views are on the table, that's when you have the opportunity to bring it all together and find a middle ground. And that's what America is about, finding that middle ground. It's about compromise. It's not about perfection. It's about a messy, democratic, and capitalist process that generates good outcomes but not perfect ones. And that's okay. And it's often said, never let the perfect get in the way of the good. And I think President Obama actually espouses that as well. Let's find a way to move the ball forward. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to always be making progress. And I think, to the extent that there are some people who are afraid to espouse their opinions, that's when the squeaky grease, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's a problem. Because often the people who are the squeakiest are the ones also who say, we don't like change, we don't want to change, and it keeps the society stuck where it is. And we Americans have a ton of problems, whether it's our massive deficit, our failing infrastructure, our students who are not the top of the world, not even close. We have a lot of progress to make. We have lack of high-speed rail, we have crime, we have all kinds of problems throughout the countryside. Rural poverty, urban poverty, so on and so forth. And the Chinese are eating our lunch. And so the status quo simply will not work. So that's where leadership comes in. Who is going to lead us forward so that we are better able to compete with the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Brazilians, the South Africans, the Indians? Who is that leader? Who are those leaders? Apparently we have yet to produce that because we're losing much in terms of competitive market share.